Hello, everybody, and welcome into my latest live broadcast. Today it is Tuesday, the 13th of February, 2024, and of course, my name is CareyHolzman, and we're going to pick up today on where we left off Super Bowl Sunday. I I don't know if I want to say foolishly decided to do a brand new review video live that I had no preparation or rehearsal for. I try not to prep or rehearse because in the job that I do as an IT field service technician, there's no way you can ultimately prepare yourself besides having the tools you think you need, and then being ready to prepare for the unexpected in regards to working on customers' equipment that may have been neglected or kept in a terrible environment, or maybe something you've never seen before. Lots of different makes and models of computers out there, and of course people building their own, so you never quite know what you're going to encounter in the wild, but you are expected to fix it. There's only a certain amount of prep you can have to do this job, unless you work in a corporate environment or an office where everything is always the same, in which case that's relatively routine. That's why a lot of people who work in those office environments or corporate environments in IT, they often get asked by the employees if they can fix their personal computers, and generally the answer is no. And part of that reason is because they don't know how. If it's outside of company equipment, they don't know how to do it. And then the second thing is they do this 40 hours or more a week, and they don't want to do more of it when they get home. So usually one of those two reasons. Whereas a field service tech, that's just routine. It's just another day. So when I do my reviews, I try and treat it the same way as though a customer said, hey, I bought these parts, can you build this for me? Because I was doing that for a while as well, but then customers were buying crappy parts that were making my job difficult. Then they were expecting me to warranty it when all I did was build it. I'm like, no, you got to go back to who you bought these parts from. Customers got upset under this assumption that I was somehow guaranteeing whatever this stuff was they bought, and had no appreciation for some of the struggle I had making it all work because they weren't well selected parts. This is a few years back, obviously, but nonetheless, I'm not doing that anymore. A shout out and a thank you to our friends over at Acronis. Is your computer backed up? Because look, in the computer world, we like to use computer words, computer terms, when we already have English words that accurately describe what we're talking about with the computer. I don't know why we do it. I mean, it's fair to say we have a lot of different words for the same thing in the English language. We can refer to money as cash, bucks, dinero. We know what we're talking about with that kind of stuff. And when it comes to computers, it's no different. When we say backup, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, double entendre, where essentially you want to be able to recover what went wrong by going back in time, to back up in time to before this unexpected event happened, to put you back to where the computer was an hour ago or a week ago, or however far back up you want to go. Get it? And that's why Apple's backup software is called Time Machine. You're backing up, and then you're going to restore your backup so you can be back up and running. So it's a double entendre. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, but the fact is, it's like the old, I'm going to show my age, it's like the old skit on Saturday Night Live from Rob Schneider, making copies. All you're doing is making copies of important information, or maybe imaging a copy of your entire hard drive if you have the time and a large enough backup device to do that. There's multiple ways to back up, and the other thing is if you wanted to upgrade your main C drive and you didn't want to have to reinstall everything and start over, you can do something called cloning, which is just a mirror image of what you've got moved over to a different location. And Acronis does both full system images, file backup, and cloning. It does all of it. And you can even back it up in the cloud. I use it myself and have been using it consistently since at least 2009. And whether Acronis sponsors us or not, I'm still using their software and highly recommending it because my business productivity and how much money I can earn is pretty much key on the tools that I'm using, no differently than a mechanic or a surgeon. If they don't have the right tools to do the job may take longer, it may not be done right, and it may not be done at all, quite frankly. You can give a mechanic nothing but a pair of pliers and a hammer, and you may not think that that mechanic has any idea what they're doing. But you give them the appropriate tools, and suddenly the entire perspective changes. So having the right tools as a computer technician is critical. And so for me, I like Acronis so much, we reached out and asked them if they'd support us. They have agreed. But I said, look, when you support us, you're not just supporting me, you're supporting my viewers. So we need you to do something for them. And they agreed. So you all get a 30% discount off any Acronis product using our coupon code. And there's a free trial. Don't take my word for anything that I endorse. It may not apply to your values or your needs or your expectations. I don't know most of you in real life. So what I would encourage you to do, though, is to evaluate it for yourself with no risk, no credit cards required or anything like that. There's no trickery. Every one of these companies that support us here are companies I really use in the real world with my real customers that I'm held accountable and responsible for. So if I get a customer all screwed up with, let's say, backup software that didn't work and now they need a recovery and it's not there, they could sue the oblivion out of me. I'd be out of business. So I take this stuff. You can only imagine how serious this is to me. The good news is a lot of the tools that I use are just everyday tools that most home users, I believe, would benefit from. And that includes RoboForm. That includes the Windows license keys from VIP CDK deals and those low-cost Microsoft license keys they also sell that are also guaranteed and are also discounted with our coupon code. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Instant House Call. And the reason I'll save that one and put it at the end here of our supporters is because maybe that's not for everybody, right? Whereas most of these tools, everything else everybody needs. You need some backup software. You're going to need a Windows or an Office license. You're going to need a password manager. If you're like most of us, you have dozens and dozens of different logins and passwords, and it'd be very difficult to keep track of them. Maybe you take and write them down. Very insecure to do it that way. RoboForm's cheaper than lunch at Arby's and for a full year's license, and you can install it on as many devices as you want. Now, our friends over at Instant House Call, they make a specialized remote support tool for technicians. So unlike other remote support tools, let me rephrase, unlike most other remote support software, Instant House Call has support tools built into it. And a lot of the free remote software doesn't allow file transfer. It's very limited, and it might be fine for a home user that needs to connect to a friend or a family member, or maybe even a home office or something where the quality of the connection isn't that important, and all you're really wanting to do is grab control of a keyboard or a mouse. Instant House Call does so much more than that. And where Instant House Call shines for me personally is when a customer calls me who doesn't have the remote software on their side. That is the biggest nightmare historically for me, is to walk them through how to download the client side of remote software. It doesn't matter what the software is. There's all these downloads to pick from. They don't know which one it is. Is it the host? Is it this? Is it, which one do I get? Instant House Call takes all that away, and it's just, I send them to my own link that's mine, uniquely mine. I give that to them, and it takes them right there to the customer side of how to connect to me. It's basically 2 clicks, and then you just hit you fill in, you tell me who you are and what you want, and you hit the button to request support. And on my side, the software lights up, and the speaker goes off, and like a phone call on the computer, it says, you have a support request from, and then regarding whatever the trouble is. And then all I have to do is hit accept, no differently than hitting the answer button on a telephone. And I'm connected to that client. It's really amazing. And they've got billing software built into it and feedback surveys at the end so the customer can give you feedback. It's all optional. As a person that runs a repair business, you can customize it to uninstall itself when it's done, or to leave itself on the customer's desktop as like a business card for you with your own custom logo. Anyway, like I said, it may not be for most of the home users out there, but if you're running your own business, as I run my own, I think you'll find it is not only one of the best remote repair desktop applications, but it's also one of the least expensive, and I mean by far. Take a look at TeamViewer prices someday, and TeamViewer doesn't hold a candle to this. So my thanks and a shout out to all of them. And of course to all of you, all of the viewers, all the members, all of our moderators. Thank you guys so much. Of course to Mara joining us in the chat room, who's creating our thumbnails and doing all of our video descriptions and working diligently to find us more potential supporters here on the channel that meet my requirements, which is not an easy task because we don't just take anybody. It's got to be something I truly believe in and that will stand behind their product and offer you guys a discount that I think is useful and of value to you guys. So that's a pretty fine filter they've got to fit through. So I hope you guys appreciate that. And at the end of the day, it's only your opinion that matters. And if you have experience with any of these companies and you want to share that with us, good or bad, we certainly, I'm sure the community who's skeptical would appreciate hearing your experiences. Greg Gasabona just contributed $20 in Super Chat. Greg says, I just built an ASRock Z7090 PG Lightning motherboard. That's a good board. With G-Skill Riptide DDR4. It was so fast to load that on a DDR5 memory. Nice to see you. I don't understand. Did he install DDR4 or DDR5? I was fast to load. I've never seen that on a DDR5. Well, thank you for the contribution. Guys, I have to encourage, when you're writing your messages, slow down and reread your messages back to yourself, especially if they're longer. And what I have found works for me is to read your message out loud. If you read it in your head, you'll roll right by, at least I do, missing words or jumbled thoughts. So when I read it out loud, like I just did, then if you do that yourself, you'll hear it the same way I said it, and then you can correct it before you send it. Sometimes we get a little anxious. We want to get that message out there. Thank you, Craig. I appreciate your contribution and for sharing your build with us. And also, where was I? And Craig is also a member, so thank you for your membership as well. All right, there's Marco joining us from Italy. Welcome in, Marco. I just want to, before we get into this whole discussion here, that's probably going to tick off a lot of AMD fanboys. I only tell you, well, there's my opinion, but there's also facts that are undeniable, that they're undebatable as far as I'm concerned. The facts that we're going to discuss about issues that are factually and scientifically provable, that are issues with these new lineup of AMD processors and even the previous generation. I have been sticking with Intel because of the consistency. I thought by now, I was hoping by now AMD has worked out all their issues, but they're still experimenting. Like with the X3D stuff, they're experimenting. With this new 8000 series, they're experimenting. And there's all kinds of issues, different issues with different generations. And the fanboys will say those aren't a big deal. But these are not generally issues you deal with Intel. And I would rather have zero issues than to have to justify any issues at all. So I would like AMD to catch up. I really would, so that the difference between Intel and AMD is more about frequency and value, or performance and value, than it is about how many fixes this one's going to need versus how many fixes, right? Because the Intel's not needing any fixes. But the AMDs, depending on which chip, we're going to get into that. And like I say, the fanboys will blow it off. The fanboys will say that's not a big deal. But on the Intel side, you don't have any of these issues. So as somebody trying to stay in business, I want my customers to be happy and not have issues. And if I have to support any issues, I have to do so at my cost. And because I'm self-employed, if I'm doing that, I'm not earning any money. And it's a good way for me to go out of business. So I don't take this stuff very lightly because for me, it is literally the life or death of my business and my livelihood. All right. Davis Parsons, now a member for 21 months. Right on. Thank you, Davis. Hey, there's another contribution from Craig Casabona. He's renewing his membership. Now he's a member for 6 months. He says, I used DDR4, and I meant to say was I never saw a motherboard start up that fast. I guess he's saying he's never seen a motherboard start up that fast with DDR4. Whether you're using DDR4 or 5 should not affect your motherboard, how fast your system boots. That should be mostly on the I/O of the storage device. And of course, if you're using a Gen 4 or a Gen 5 storage device and comparing it to a Gen 3 or SATA, you may in fact see a boot difference. But primarily, there's that. And then, of course, the time the BIOS takes to host before the Windows load starts. Sometimes on some systems, I've seen that take 3-4 seconds. And I don't know, do you count that in the boot time? Because technically the boot time doesn't, I mean, for me, it starts when Windows starts to load. But for other people, the boot time is from when you hit the power button. And some machines are just cycle through the BIOS faster, or some may have fast boot enabled in the BIOS. And if you're comparing two systems and you're like, well, this system's way faster than the other one, it may be because one has fast boot enabled and the other one doesn't. Something else to think about. But it sounds like a great build. Which CPU did he say what CPU he used? No. Which CPU? All right, I'll wait. Moving on. I want to make sure I caught everybody's contribution here before I get too ahead of myself. Yeah, I think I covered everybody. If I haven't, let me know. But I think that catches me up. Okay. So we were reviewing the AMD 8600G processor on Sunday, and I had about an hour and a half before the Super Bowl started, and I thought, yeah, I should be able to get this done in an hour. And in fact, I did, but wasn't able to test it because Windows updates needed to install. I did so much so quickly that I created a lot of problems for myself. So if you didn't watch the first part of this video, essentially there was a scene where the mouse and keyboard weren't working right. And it was simply because I didn't push the wireless dongle, USB dongle, all the way in. These USB ports are super tight. So, when I put this heatsink on, I just used my electric driver to slap it on there because I figure it's a 5 series. It's not a 7 or a 9 Ryzen. So the heat shouldn't be too bad on that anyway. I was wrong. This thing bolted to 95 degrees Celsius within 90 seconds of prime 95, and I shut it down because I think something's wrong. Then I started to do a little research. Now when things weren't what I was expecting, and I didn't have any preconceived ideas from other websites or other reviewers, I'm able to come at this from a very, I don't want to say naive point of view. I'm using 30 plus years of experience to understand what to expect. And I don't want that muddied by reading a bunch of reviews or watching some reviewer videos where they might be measuring things I'm not interested in, or their testing procedure is something I don't agree with. So I was expecting these newer AMD CPUs, for example, are going to be Gen 5, right? When AMD sent the test kit, they sent the RAM, they sent the CPU, which came with a cooler, and you think that cooler would be adequate, right? and they sent the ASRock, the B650 Pro RS. So one of the first things we did in that video is we did the BIOS flashback feature to show how that works on ASRock boards, because we showed previously how it works on MSI boards. And by the way, the process, it looks like with Gigabyte and with Asus, it's the same deal, right? You can update these BIOSes without any RAM or CPU installed, and they all mostly are interchangeable with how that works. So when I downloaded all the updates and I put the AMD Adrenalin software on, at that point, the Super Bowl was on, and I was coming in here and I was letting it run, and it took another hour and a half to grab all those updates. And then finally I could run some tests. So first thing I run is Crystal Disk Mark. I expect to see 12,400 megabytes per second out of this solid state storage drive. And it was only getting 7,000, little over. Well, that's Gen 4 all day. Then I started to, so I'm wondering, what did I do wrong? I know for a fact that is a Gen 5 slot. This is a Gen 5 motherboard. And that's a brand new CPU. So when Intel introduced their Gen 5 compatibility on their chips, every chip they've made since for the consumer, as far as I know, on all the platforms, supports Gen 5. You wouldn't go backwards and not support it anymore. And AMD supported Gen 5 first. They were months ahead of Intel, releasing a CPU that supported those Gen 5 speeds, even when there were no Gen 5s available to buy. The AMD was already on board. So my thought was, then every CPU from this point forward from AMD should be Gen 5, right? Isn't that how it works? No. What AMD decided to do on this new 8000 series is to reroute all of that extra power for Gen 5 and to put it into the onboard graphics to give it the best onboard graphics of any CPU currently on the market. So to me, I'm not a gamer. My customers aren't gamers. I'm interested in business and productivity use on this. Now, the difference between Gen 4 and Gen 5, for most people, you're not going to notice it. Right? If you're doing a lot of high-end production stuff, you'll see it. But I want it, and I'd like to know that I could have it if later on prices for Gen 5 come down, and they will, and they're much more affordable. It would make sense to put the Gen 5 in it at that point, but you're never going to be compatible with Gen 5 with an 8000 series AMD CPU. That was shocking to hear that. On the other hand, if you're a gamer and you don't have the money or you don't want a discrete graphics card, this will give you the best graphics you can get today in February of 24 built into the CPU, because you're sacrificing all that other all those other performance channels and putting it all into the graphics card. So in my mind, this is a console CPU. You understand? Like, that's my opinion. That's how I would have marketed it. So once I figured out what I was dealing with and I started to research it, one thing led to another. And this CPU also has a thermal issue, as does the 7000 series, although the thermal issues are different. And there will be a fix for the thermal issue. Now, we've got links to everything I'm talking about in the video notes, as always. Always check the video notes below the video. And they're all from reputable news organizations and sources. It's not just some guy on Reddit, okay? This is all verified, factual information. So they forgot on this chip, it doesn't support this, what is it, STAPM or something. And you say, well, what the heck is that? Well, let's take a look real quick at that. Let me go over to my, let's go to the first article. All right, let's cover this whole Gen 4, Gen 5 thing. Again, that's not a big deal today, but the longevity of it, as prices come down and you want to upgrade, you will not be able to upgrade until you change that chip out. Everything else on this platform, this RAM, this heatsink, this motherboard, they all support Gen 5. It's only the CPU that's throttling you down. And there's no fixing that other than to pull the CPU and put a different model of AMD CPU in there. So let's see, we'll go over to our window capture. So why did that happen? Hold on. So right here, you'll see AMD Ryzen 8000 series CPUs are limited to PCIe 4x4 for your discrete graphics card. So even that is going to be slow. And PCIe 4.0 times 2 on your M2 SSDs. I'm not quite sure what they're saying there because we have 3 M.2 ports, not 2. So I guess that's not the number of ports. Unless that's the number of PCIe. I don't know. Is it saying we can only use 2 of the ports? I'm not sure. I only put 1 NVMe in every build anyway, so I'm not quite sure. PCIe, now this says PCIe 4.0x4. Okay, yeah. Anyway, so they've done so this information was available to me before I did the review. I didn't know to look for it. And if you look down here at the different models, the 7000 series versus the 8000, you can see the 8000's worse in these IO numbers. Look at that. Look at the difference between the 7000 and the 8000. And then when we come over here to this news article, it says AMD is set to fix the 8000 series APU STAPM throttling issue. Now, I never heard of STAPM. I don't know what the heck that is. I'm mostly dealing with Intel, and Intel doesn't have such terminology. So this is a learning experience for me, but they have something called, and again, it's a very bizarre name, Skin Temperature Aware Power Management. And what's interesting is it was introduced by AMD back in 2014. And it's an on-die power management. But the issue is this chip doesn't support that somehow, somewhere. I'm not reading this whole thing out to you, but you can certainly, if you're interested, take your time and read it. But effectively, it's something they should have disabled that apparently they forgot to. And they said when they were playing 720 high settings, within 3 minutes, they saw a drop of around 22% because the CPU was thermally throttling itself, slowing itself down because it thought it was overheating. This issue apparently affects all AM5 motherboard and BIOS currently available, so there's no way to properly run an 8000G chip without STAPM throttling for the time being. On the other hand, there are also articles stating the AMD's new Ryzen 8000 APUs are faster than many graphics cards in games. So it's not all bad, but you're sacrificing a bunch of other stuff just for this one result, essentially, is what it's coming down to. And it still doesn't really mention the STAPM issue here where the CPU throttle. So when it's working like it should, you're going to see great onboard graphics performance in your gaming. On the other hand, you're going to see terrible I/O, and it may throttle itself until these fixes are out. Now, I have another build. Oh, so let me tell you, I bought last month, Newegg had a sale where you got this a different AMD processor with RAM and a motherboard, and it was like $150 less than buying each item separately. That was too good of a deal to say no to. And I saw that the processor was a Ryzen 5 7600X. As far as I know, those chips are good, but I haven't used one before, and I thought it'd be great variety for the channel. The 8700G AMD CPU and motherboard that I purchased for the Johnsbow build were still within the 30-day return window, and I sent them back to Amazon for a refund. And the Johnsbow build will likely now be Intel-based as a result of this new information. Again, as a home user, it is probably not that big of a deal. But as a business owner who could, potentially sell you a computer that has performance issues, throttling issues, and doesn't perform the I/O that you might expect, it's likely that it would result in support calls to me as though it were my fault. and may even be refunded if a customer is told, hey, there's no fix for this. Now, like anything new that comes out, if you want to be the first, as I was with the 8000 series, I thought the 8000 series was just a polish of the 7000, but no. And then AMD has the X3D chips, and the X3D chips have a whole different issue, which in many cases, many reviewers are saying stay away from the X3D stuff. There are some concerns about the inconsistency of the chip, where it performs great in one thing, in one game, let's say, but in another game performs horribly. And this is a 3D cache that AMD is experimenting with to differentiate themselves from their competitor, but it's just not polished yet, and it may even not be a feasible solution to what they're trying to accomplish. There's a lot of consequences to it. It's not all good. And unfortunately, AMD's highest end CPU is over $600, and it's this X3D technology that unfortunately does not have stable and consistent performance. It just depends on what you're doing with it. In some cases it shines, and in other cases it's terrible. And at $600, I want everything to shine. One of the issues, because of this, I thought, well, I mean, I'm stuck with this, so we're going to build it. But I thought, I don't recall seeing anything about the 7600X. Oh, this thermally is designed to normally run at 95 degrees Celsius. What? Let me repeat myself. This chip is designed to run at 95 degrees Celsius. It's got something, all the AMD chips have something called PBO, Precision Boost Overdrive, or something like that. And you can disable it in the motherboard. And I'm wondering if something like that's happening to us. But if you disable PBO in the motherboard, you just lose a lot of performance. So you might be watching your temperatures, as many do here on YouTube and on the internet, and say, oh my gosh, you know, my CPU is reaching 95 degrees, I better shut it off. AMD says, no, 95 degrees is normal. So then you're going to say, well, you know, maybe I'm wrong here, but doesn't higher heat result in a lower lifespan? You know, aren't I going to kill this early? And they'll say, don't worry about it. It'll be so many years before that happens, it won't matter. If this thing will last, if the technology in here is good for 100 years or even 50 years, if you were cutting that life in half by running it at 95 on a regular basis, you're still going to get 25, 20 years out of it. That seems to be the attitude. On the other hand, it means your cooler is going to be running super loud, right? It's got to be really aggressive because it's battling 95 degrees Celsius when this thing is boosting. And that's exactly what they designed it to do. So if you want more information on the 7600X, be sure and watch the review Gamers Nexus did on this. This was a year ago. All right. So this is not a new chip. This chip has been out for a year. And if that bothers you or concerns you, stay away from it. Now, had I realized that, I would not have bought it. I didn't think I had to worry about these issues. I thought when the AMD chips first came out, this is when I would expect this kind of stuff. But as they're introducing like X3D, I would think that's better. Now, as they introduce the 8000 series, which is the biggest number, the latest edition, I would assume that's better than the previous edition. Kinda, if you're into the onboard graphics, but in every other category, not so much. With Intel, I'm accustomed to each generation being an improvement on the previous generation. And some may argue, look, there's not a lot of innovation there. Okay, I'll agree with you for sure. The 14th generation was a giant disappointment because it really isn't a 14th gen. It's really the same as 13th gen. The technology didn't change. They just boosted more performance out of the previous gen. So that's not a new generation, technically speaking. That's a marketing term and is a letdown. On the other hand, they're not experimenting and using you guys as guinea pigs either. It's consistent. It has the same build quality and performance, well, not the same performance, but the same thermal performance, or very similar to the 13th gen because it's effectively the same chip. And if anything, it's more overclockable than the 13th gen because they have to use only the best silicon. When they create the dies for these chips, they don't all come out equal. Some are better than others. They call it the silicon lottery. You can buy multiple identical makes and models of chips, and they will perform thermally different, and some are more overclockable than others. So if you're an overclocker, you'll be more successful in your overclock with a 14th gen than a 13th gen. And it's totally logical when you consider what Intel did, which was almost like a desperate move, you know, like we have to come out with something, but we don't have anything ready yet. So let's just take the thing we already did and just, you know, polish it up. In one case, they added 2 cores on one of the models, but otherwise they're just slightly faster, a little more optimized. And we'll call it 14th gen, even though the generation of the technology is the same as the previous. That is a different problem, right? That's not a customer calling me for support because they're going to say, hey, the technology in my chip is the same as the previous gen. I'm not going to get that call. I am going to get a call if their CPU is running hot. I am going to get a call if the system starts slowing down and the performance goes, I don't know, this thing just slows down at times. Can you tell me why? That's the design of the chip. Or there's a firmware fix that's going to come out, but it's not out yet. So there's nothing I can do to fix it until it's in the hands of the manufacturers of the boards and the chip manufacturer to provide that update. And when it comes out, I can update it for you. But until then, there's nothing I can do. How would you feel if you were my customer and I told that to you and you just handed me your hard-earned money for a build? How would you feel if you used your own hard-earned money, didn't do your research, put the system together and found these issues unexpectedly? How would you feel? So these are things to consider. The AMD chips I've used recently have performed really, really well. So that's why I was doing more and more AMD, because I thought we're out of the woods now. AMD got their stuff together and they're more consistent, but they're not. No. AMD still trying to figure out how to differentiate themselves from Intel. And they're trying a lot of stuff and throwing it at the wall to see what sticks. And of course, as the consequences start being fed back to them, they're either trying to fix the issue or going to drop the issue entirely and move on to something else. We'll see how that works out. So today I thought we would look at the performance on this. I'll show you the Crystal Disk Mark. It's going to run at 7,000. It's Gen 4. So putting a Gen 5 drive in this is a waste of money. And Gen 5 drives are more than twice the price of a similar capacity Gen 4. So for the price of this 2 terabyte Gen 5 drive, I could have bought a 4 terabyte Gen 4 and had money left over to go to dinner. So I'm not real happy, except to say that this isn't my stuff anyway. So that drive will come back out and go back in the box for a build where it'll be utilized. Regardless of how this test turned out, that was going to be the end result anyway. But it's certainly food for thought on future builds and future advice and warnings to give to my clients. To set expectations is the most important part of my job. The expectations, if the customer agrees, will define if your customer is going to be upset or not when you're done with the job. So if you can predict all the bad things that can happen, and you can predict how much you're going to need to charge them, how long it's going to take, and the customer agrees to all these terms, then the only reason you're going to have an upset customer is you did not meet your own standards. That's on you. So yeah, I thought I'd fire it up, and then we'll run Prime 95. I'm going to show you how fast this thing heats up. And I started to think that because I slapped the heatsink on thinking, it's just a Ryzen 5, it shouldn't run that hot. I'm very wrong. It does run hot. But I also feel like I shouldn't have put the heatsink on that way. It's a little overconfident that this chip wouldn't be running that hot, so it wouldn't be that sensitive. So we're going to take it back off, reapply it just a little more properly. I don't think it's going to make any difference, but the only way to know, you can't assume in repair. You can't say, well, it can't be this because, no. The only way you know if a component is good or not, You have to test each component. You can't, if what you're going to do is say, well, it can't be the power supply because it comes on. No, that's not a good technician. And you likely will spin around in circles, spending way too much time as you're refusing to test potentially the part that's causing the problem, because in your mind, you said there's no way it can be that when you never actually tested it. That gets more wannabe techs in trouble. And people that have been in this industry for a while will consistently tell you, you cannot do that. If you want to get in and out quickly and get on with your life, test everything. Obviously, you're going to test the thing you think is most likely from experience to cause that issue. But you know, if you're not getting the answer, then it's not making sense to you. So whatever the solution is, when you say, well, it can't be the power supply, so there's no sense in testing it. Well, if the problem doesn't make sense to you, then the reason that the item that's causing the problem won't make sense to you either. It doesn't have to make sense to you. Your job is to figure out what's wrong with it and fix it. Once it's fixed, if you want to think about or do forensics and what caused it, I guarantee you it'll make sense. PSC Computers Missouri with a $10 super chat. Thank you for that. Kevin Sigler just became a supporter. Right on. Welcome into the Tech Club, Kevin. David Graham with $2 twice in super chat. Said his team won in the Super Bowl and they had a Super Bowl party and it was fun. Right on. Good job, David. Congratulations, I guess. I don't think you were playing. Craig Casabona with a $5 super chat says he installed an Intel 14100 processor that he's using in the computer build that he's watching now. 14100, isn't that an i3? I would not personally put a processor in that low when you're spending so much money on all the surrounding components. The problem that you potentially run into is how long that processor will be useful to you. Now, that being said, let me just verify with the 14100. It sounds like an i3. Yeah, I don't use i3 processors and I don't recommend them. And the reason is because you're not likely going to get 8 years out of it. However, you might, because i3 processors today are much more similar to i5s of yesteryear. So these beliefs I have and this experience I have is changing, potentially needs to be keeping up with the times. But at the same time, depending on the future of software and specifically AI and how demanding it gets on your CPU, you might find your i3 coming up short. So the general rule is when you're building a machine, and if you want it to last a minimum of 8 years, start at i5. And the difference in price is like $100. So if you're already dropping $600, $700 on your build, to just drop another $100 that buys you another few years of life is generally worth it, unless the computer's only going to be used for light tasks and it's never going to change. You're never going to run video editing. You're never interested in photo editing and photography. It's hard to determine what our interests are going to be. Or you're planning on replacing it in 3 or 4 years anyway. But it's a good CPU as far as reliability goes, right? And it runs cool and it's low power, but it's also low performance because it's low power. So just a little food for thought when you're thinking of building your machine. My recommendation is don't scrape the bottom of the barrel. You've got a really good motherboard. You've got good RAM. You likely have good storage, and you're potentially bottlenecking it with that CPU. I don't want to discourage your build at all. So please don't take what I'm saying as that. I think it's great that you build your own system, and I think it's great it boots super fast. And it may be all you need, but we don't know what resource requirements our future needs are going to have. They may not change for you. And if they don't change, your system will run as well today as it will 10 years from now. If I wanted to pull up a Windows 98 computer with original hardware and original OS, it will run just as fast today as it did back then. It may not be useful to me, and it may not have the resources I need to run modern. I know it's not. to run modern day, something as simple as antivirus. So to me personally, I don't sell i3 processors. The only time I would recommend the lower scale, we had that Ryzen-based mini PC that, in my opinion, was better than Intel's N100 because it supported dual channel RAM and N100 didn't. It was also aggressively priced. And I thought, compared to the Intel on the low end scale, the Ryzen 3 was much more preferred. I bet you weren't expecting me to say that, but it is what it is. And of course, you can always upgrade that processor later, but that means you just spent even more for your build instead of buying, a middle ground processor right out of the gate. But as long as you're happy with it, as long as it meets your needs, hey, listen, that's why these processors are made, to meet different people's needs. And how you use the machine, like I said, if you're not really running any process intensive, resource intensive tasks, you'll be happy with that for a long time. There's our friend Planet Cryos with a $2 super chat. Thank you for that. $1 came in from somebody with a message retracted. I don't know who sent that or what they... There's Sherry McFarland joining us. Hey, welcome in, Sherry. In the chat room, someone's asking if they can run 8 gig or higher games on a Paladin WI6 mini PC, Intel 116 gigs of RAM. You're going to have to try it and let us know. There's all different kinds of games that have all different kinds of requirements. So there's not any one rule that all games have to follow. So depending on the games you're playing and the resolutions you play at and the frame rates that you're expecting is all an individual decision. Like asking me what you should order at a menu on a Cheesecake Factory has a menu this thick. I can't order for you. I don't know you. So you'll have to just try it and see how it performs for you. And if you do, let us know. All right. Greg Casabona says the system he built is not for him, that he uses an i7-13700KF processor. Oh, well, that's the other thing. So if you're building a machine for somebody who doesn't, like most of you watching, I assume, are really into computers and you probably use the heck out of it. I assume you're more knowledgeable users and you're more likely going to run your computer you're going to be using your computer more than, say, the average ordinary citizen who's just going to turn the computer on, check messages, and maybe, spend an hour on it like it's a task once a day or something. I gotcha. Well, thank you, Craig, and thank you for sharing your story. Again, it wasn't meant to disparage you at all. It's just something for everybody else to consider because, you'll see that $100 price savings. It may not consider how that could affect the usability of that machine in the future. However, it may not, right? That's for you to decide. That's all I'm saying. There's a contribution from CareyHolzman and contributes 55 TRY. I have never seen that currency type. Now I have to Google what that is. Oh, it's a Turkish lira. How cool. Well, welcome in from Turkey. I guess we have a Turkish viewer. That may be the first time ever. That's about $1.79. Hey, look, I appreciate it. It's very generous that you give anything at all and supporting the channel. It all adds up. And thank you so much. And welcome in from Turkey. Very cool. Matt's Comp says an i5-12400 is likely a better deal than the newer Gen 3s. Where I live, it is anyway. Hard to argue with the extra cores for performance. Yeah, but if they're not being used, what difference does it make? Hey, there's our friend Mitch Morrison joining us in the chat. Mitch may be joining us this Friday for, I might do, so I have two builds. I have this AMD build, right? This was a bundle deal from Newegg that was such a good deal. And I'm like, well, to save 140 bucks, I'll buy it, right? It was a motherboard, RAM, and CPU combo that was about 140, 160, somewhere in there. Price difference than if you put the parts individually in your cart and bought them. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but we'll build it and we'll be aware of the potential heat issues here. But if you want to learn more about the 7600X, this is a Ryzen 5, just like these Ryzen 5. Hold on, now I'm confused. I've confused myself. Rats. I'd have to turn it on and check. We have an 8600G and an 8700G, and I think one's a Ryzen 5, one's a Ryzen 7, or are they both Ryzen 7s? The longer you stay in this business and the more you start learning all the names and numbers of the routers, the motherboards, the chipsets, the graphics card models, the Wi-Fi differences, all the different generations for USB is getting really confusing. The different PCIe generations and what all that means and all the new terminology that's coming out. When you first start out, you don't have all that historical information necessarily because it's not relevant. And then the longer you stay in the business, it just starts filling your brain. And then eventually, when you reach a certain number of hours into this business, with how quickly it's evolving, combined with regular memory degradation due to age, you're going to find yourself in my position where it's like, no, wait a minute. Which one was, what were we talking about? You know, even different things about power supply A's and 80 plus. It's like never ending. So, you know, bear with me as we work through unscripted. I think I do pretty good personally. I might be biased, but I think I do pretty good working off the top of my head. But I don't think that's going to get any better. Like, the older I get and the more new stuff comes out, this will only get worse. Just want you to be prepared for the future of what to expect here if we continue to do these live and unscripted. All right, so one of the other things I wanted to mention before we get back to this is we have different issues along the line with these 7000 and 8000 series AMD CPUs. They're not the same issues. So for example, and this is not meant to be a hit piece on AMD. This is meant to be a self-awareness campaign that's just identifying factual information. If you choose to dismiss it as not being a big deal, you're not wrong. And if you think it is a big deal and unacceptable, you're also not wrong. I want to be clear on that. So here we see Gamers Nexus looking at the Ryzen 7 7800 X3D. You might want to check out these results and look at these thermals. The chip we have here is not the X3D, it's just the X. And if you want to look at the, again, at Gamers Nexus, they reviewed the what do we have here? Ryzen 5 7600X. And yeah, it's hitting 95C normally. Like, that's a normal thing for it to do. So Steve over at Gamers Nexus was extremely disappointed that AMD made that decision. And kind of on board with him on that. Then I think, did we go through all the tabs? Oh, this was another issue last year. AMD CPUs were burning themselves up, literally catching fire, well, burning. You see the burn mark here on the socket, and you'll see this discoloration or bump here and up at the top half of the CPU. This was happening to a lot of people. Now, I want to again reiterate, if you want to be first of something new that comes out, this is what comes along with being first. Not only are you going to pay the highest price that chip is going to sell for, Remember, as these chips age, they go down in value. You also may be fighting with a bunch of other people all trying to buy the chip on the day it comes out because they don't have as much product made yet. And then you might deal with issues like this that AMD or whoever the manufacturer is, if it's a new technology, it's likely gonna have some polishing it needs. And then of course, they get resolved, right? So wouldn't you be better off, instead of being first, waiting about 6 months of any new generation of product? So when we talk about Intel, we're on the 14th generation. That's not a new generation. That's a polishing of the previous generations. When we're talking about a brand new technology that, for example, AMD introduced this X3D technology, that's a brand new first generation product. So if you wait about 6 months, all these issues should be resolved, the price should be cheaper, and you shouldn't be inconvenienced with the problems. But if you want to be first and you want to pay more, potentially struggle to find one, right? Because a bunch of other people want to be first, and then deal with these issues, even to the point of having to send the CPU back under warranty and being without a working computer due to the inconvenience. And in this case, not only would the CPU need to be replaced, but this motherboard would need to be replaced too. So you're going to be without a machine for a while. And if you're running a business like I am and you sold that to a customer and that happened, that's going to cost you a lot more than you made. And if you sold a lot of them, that can shut your business down. That can cost you more. At that point, you're giving out more money than you're making, to the point where there may not be any money left for you to pay any bills. So as a business owner, somebody who builds and sells computers, this is my worst nightmare. And that's why when I sell computers to customers, and I'm holding myself up to a higher standard because I have to protect my business, I want to make sure that I'm using a known good platform. Because when the customer gets this from me, they're going to say this is my fault. They're going to say I sold them something crappy, even if I put it together right, delivered it on time and for a great price. They forget all that. All they're thinking about is what's happening right now, the inconvenience. And all I'm thinking about is how I have to stop earning money to go back to something I sold previously and fix it for free. And I can't fix something for free and make money at the same time. And if I have multiple customers, right, all affected by this, and they have to each wait their own turn, and it's going to take longer and longer, they likely will never buy from me again, even though there's nothing I could have done other than not sold it until it had proven itself for at least 6 months to a year in the marketplace. So that's the difference between me and a home user. Home users wouldn't be happy about it, but at least they don't necessarily lose their house. So yeah, I think we've been through all of these articles. And if you want to read these articles in full, which I certainly recommend that you do if you're interested, all of the links are in our video notes. And do your own independent Google searches to sites, tech newsworthy sites that you trust. Because these are factual items, it's not an opinion of what's going on here. You should be able to verify through numerous respectable tech news organizations that these issues are real. And the only thing that differentiates them, I suppose, will be just how concerned they are about it. You know, at the end of the day, it's really how big of a deal you think it is, right? For your reasons. I have my reasons. So just setting expectations. When expectations are met, customers are happy. That's all. So if you go, I don't care if the chip burns up, you're going to be happy when it burns up. You won't be so pissed off. And if you say, oh, no, I can't afford to have a chip burn up. I can't be without a machine. Well, if it burns up, you're going to be pissed. It's all about expectations, man. That's all it is. It's super easy to have a happy customer. Just meet the expectations that you promised them. Now, again, this is not meant as a hit piece on AMD. You know, we built the N-Core 100 Max. That uses an AMD CPU. Seems to run great. Of course, we do have a liquid cooler on it. I have the last couple of AMD prior to this experience, I thought everything was getting better and I was buying more. And I was like, hey, more variety for the channel. And now I'm being reminded why I haven't been building with AMD. I am this way, okay? I realize things change. And so if you had a bad experience with something and you never try it again, you might be missing out on something that's really, really good. So for example, if you bought a, I don't know, a Ford automobile in 1965, and it was nothing but a money pit of problems, and you're never going to buy a Ford ever again. And now, you know, 50, 60 years later, you're still stubbornly not buying a Ford automobile when none of the same employees are likely there. The management's completely different. The parts are completely different. It's essentially a different company now. Are they still making crap cars? So I do this to myself. There'll be some restaurant that I don't like. Kentucky Fried Chicken. That I used to like when I was a kid. And I go there and I think, you know, I used to like this. And I see people in the drive-thru, people are eating it. I should go back and revisit. And then I go there and it's terrible. And I have now reminded myself, this is why I don't eat here. I totally forgot. And then a couple of years go by and I think, hey, maybe, you know, I'm driving by KFC and I think maybe things have gotten better, right? It's been a few years. I know I didn't like it, but I can't remember why. So I'll go in there and I'll get some food. And I did that recently. That's why it's on my mind. And I had an upset stomach the whole next day. Also, the food it tasted like it was under a heat lamp for 3 hours. It didn't taste fresh. So it's not what it used to be. But at the same time, you know, they could have gotten better. And if I just stopped going, I'd never know. So I do believe in revisiting things, whether it's hardware, restaurants, whatever, because management changes. In the case of restaurants, the employees are going to change, the processes and the menu items may change, and even the food suppliers can change. So it can be effectively a completely different experience, for better or for worse. And sometimes it's just more of the same, right? And so sometimes I need these reminders because over time I've forgotten how upset I was. And that's where we're at with this. Now, Patrick, who loaned us these parts from Serve the Home, great website, by the way, I mentioned all of this to him. I can't believe this. And he said, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. Okay, well, is he right? Or am I right? I think it's a really big deal. Patrick is not building and selling customers to clients. So there's no right or wrong here. This is purely opinion-based. And I respect you guys enough to come up with your own opinions. We don't have to agree, and it doesn't matter if we do or not, because quite frankly, I'm not selling any of this to you regardless. And I'm not profiting if you choose to buy or not buy one brand or another. I have no dog in that race. Again, this is all about setting expectations. All right. John Williams says, same here. I went to Wendy's and could not keep the food down. You know what? I like Wendy's. They have that spicy chicken sandwich that is so good, and their French fries are really good. What bothers me about Wendy's, and their hamburgers are good too. But what bothers me about Wendy's is they were running a campaign that said, your fries will be hot and fresh, guaranteed. They were just doing this like last year. And all I could think to myself is, well, what were they before? I'm confused. Weren't they always supposed to be hot and fresh from day one? Like, what? So in any event, I've had some bad experiences at Wendy's and McDonald's and places I'll go. And some food doesn't sit well with me, like, you know, Burger King. But that's to our own personal biology and taste, right? But I have found personally, I think Wendy's quality is pretty good, especially if you compare it to Taco Bell. But hey, that's just me. To each our own. I mean, I think Domino's pizza is disgusting, but it used to be good. Or is it that my tastes have changed? I think it's a combination of both. I think Domino's is not using as good of food, the quality of the food materials they're using. Their pepperoni tastes like liver. I don't understand what that's all about. So no Domino's for me. But at the same time, back when I was eating Domino's, I wasn't eating wood-fired, Italian certified ingredient-based pizza, which delicious. Bring it on. You know, places like Grimaldi's did not exist in places that I lived, and probably couldn't have afforded it even then. So I don't know. My tastes have probably changed over time, but I also think it's a combination. I definitely think if I had a Domino's pizza from the 1980s today, not literally, because then it would be gross, but you know what I'm saying? Like if I could go back in time and taste it again, I think I'd still like it. Maybe not as much, but I don't think it's as bad as it is today. Starshine says they prefer Pizza Hut. Yeah, Pizza Hut's okay. Their pan pizza's really good. Their personal pizzas are good too. Anyway, let's move on. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this back in. Let me move this CPU out of the way. This might be used on Friday's build, or the other build I have waiting in the wings is that big MSI Meg. Remember, we have 2 of those boards, but I only have the one chip. I spent a lot of money on that 14900K. Now, to be fair, Intel has potential heat issues too, but generally, the heat issues are generally not on anything but the upper end processors. When I'm buying if I were to buy AMD 7950, you know, top of the line X3D, I would expect, much like Intel, I'm going to need a strong cooler on that. But if it's just a Ryzen 5, I mean, I'm also aware that there are some like 14600K, 13600K, 13700K. Actually, no, 700K would be a Ryzen 7. There are some i5 processors that are pretty high power consuming and run hot, but not 95 degrees hot. Like, I don't know, this seems excessive. I might be biased on that, but not intentionally. Anyway, so we have all the parts to build that AMD system, and then we have the 14900 and the Gen 5 NVMe for the MSI Meg, which we will replace the motherboard in Robot's Foot, which is kind of a shame. I never finished it. The board's barely been used, and already I'm going to pull it. But don't worry, it'll end up going in something else. But it's no longer fresh, no longer newsworthy. So we'll pop up the 14900K in there. And I don't think this cooler that's in Robot's Foot is socket 1700 compatible, but I'm going to try it. If it doesn't work, that'll be a mismatched part, because I wanted everything to be, the power supply, the cooler, and the case are all made by the case manufacturer, so they all match. But not the end of the world if we have to change it. I realize the processor it's got in it now, as I say it out loud, has a socket 1700. That cooler seems to be working fine, but these newer ones run even hotter, and that cooler may not be good enough. But there's only one way to know for sure, and that's going to be to try it. And we can certainly swap it out with another one. That's no big deal. Just wanted to keep the aesthetic, a certain look. Now, the other system we have to build is my upcoming John's Bow build. Now, the John's Bow build features this really cool looking John's Bow case. In fact, I can give you a sneak peek of it here. If I jump over to Amazon real quick, it's a pretty unique looking case. So I was looking for an excuse to build something in it. And I believe it's this case right here. It's pretty pricey. And it looks a little bit like the coffee machine build that Gregory Howard bought, but this is bigger. This is a micro ATX case, or is it the TK2 or the TK1? Again, you want to be careful when you order these, because they have a mid tower and a full-size tower with the exact same looks. And I thought I would build it the way it looks. I think it comes with these 3 fans, but this cooler is made by Johnsbow. I don't know how well you can see that. It's a Johnsbow cooler. They don't sell that in the United States, but I bought it directly from Johnsbow on eBay, and they shipped it from South Korea, and it arrived in like 3 days. And then there's 2 fans down on the bottom here. Right down on the bottom there. See, this has got to be the wrong case. I think it's the TK1. Black and white. Let's type in TK1. One of them's big and one of them's small. Yeah, this is the smaller one. This is it. All right, this is smaller. So you see it's got the 2 fans. And if we go to the black edition is the one I picked up. So I thought, okay, this makes more sense now that I'm seeing this picture. I thought if I could sort of recreate this image, I ordered these 2 fans. These are a reverse spinning fan, so you know. That means they should be bringing air into the system instead of blowing air out. That's what it looks like. These are made by Johnsbow. And the main picture I thought had a liquid. Yeah. And then this is the 240 millimeter liquid cooler, again with the Johnsbow fans. So I wanted it all to match the aesthetic. So I've got the 2 fans. Newegg was selling the fans. I couldn't find them on Amazon. The cooler nobody was selling, but I found it on eBay direct from Johnsbow. And the motherboard I picked was the motherboard to put with the AMD 8700G. That was the build. I got the RAM, the Gen 5 storage, and of course, now you know that's not going to happen because obviously there's no Gen 5 support, and I'm disappointed with the 8700G, so I will likely pick a micro ATX Intel-based board. The only problem that I see with this build is that it may be a bit repetitive, that we have shown so many Intel stuff, so many Intel processors. We might be revisiting another, and regardless of the processor, the build process is exactly the same. So if I'm slotting in a 12th gen, a 13th gen, or 14th gen, i3, i5, i7, or i9, it makes no difference. If you weren't paying attention to that detail, all those chips to an untrained eye are exactly the same. The same shape, same design. It's only the printing on them that's different. And of course, the internals underneath that heat shield that you can't see, that's different. So it doesn't really make for a unique build video other than to show off that case and to test the ability of that Johnsbow cooler. Is it any good? I have no idea. So if you have suggestions for what I should put in there, leave them in the comments after this video is live. Perhaps I might use your idea. I don't want to put a lot of money into it though, so. Let's see. John Williams says he needs to shut down. It's 100 degrees Celsius. 100 degrees Celsius. I wonder what he's running and when that problem started. Oh, wait, maybe he said so. 4 years old. I'm watching the show on my Core i5-8400, and I think the all-in-one needs to be replaced. Yes, absolutely. You are probably dead on. Here's what you, I don't know if John's still watching, but grab the hoses on the all-in-one while the system's hot like that and see if they're hot to touch. You should know that those, if you've touched those hoses before, at least one of them is going to be uncomfortably hot if the pump isn't working, or if the fluid has been deteriorated or evaporated, or if any of the internal parts have become clogged, like any other plumbing. And with most coolers, you're at 4 or 5 year lifespan is common. We even had a cooler from Silverstone that they sent us to review, and it reviewed good, but just 1 year later, it was bad. And when I reached out to Silverstone, they said, we don't make that cooler anymore, but we can send you this other cooler. And I was like, thanks, but no thanks. It's a lot of work. But after 4 years, I'd say that's probably pretty normal, unless you bought a really high-end cooler. So like the NZXT Kraken that's in this build is probably about 4 years old. It's still running strong. When you get into the $250 range and higher, generally speaking, those Corsair IQs, those EK all-in-ones, the big brand names and the high-end models, whether it's 240 millimeter or 360 or whatever it is, pretty much you're going to get the same extended longevity, with a few exceptions. Every once in a while, they get a model that they mess something up. It'd be bad coolant that they put in there. They're not water. I mean, they're called water blocks, but they're not water. And even the best of them, like I think the Kraken series here from NZXT's, some of the best. Corsair's also got an equivalent. They're some of the best you can buy for reliability. On the other hand, if you want to spend less, you can get coolers, all-in-one coolers now for 60, 70 bucks. But the less you pay for it, likely 4 years out of the cheaper ones. Just so you know. Now, likely an 8400 i5 doesn't even need a liquid cooler. Yeah, I bet you could slap a Mugen 5, a Scythe Mugen 5 air cooler if your case is deep enough for that, and never deal with heat problems again. On the other hand, it's an 8th generation chip. We're up to the 14th generation, so we know that's at least 6 years old. He says it's 4 years old, but there's no way that was built brand new 4 years ago. Because 4 years ago, I was building i9s. I'm sorry, not i9s. 9700s, 9th generation was 4 years ago. Of course, 8th generation is only 1 more year, isn't it? So that's going to put them to 5 years. Anyway, I want to talk about this nerdy technical. Well, technically, it's probably just 5 years old. It's not 4 years old. It is what it is, right? And it's in the state that it's in. And based on that information alone, I would suggest the all-in-one cooler, you're probably dead on. It's likely what's the problem. Replace the cooler. All I'm saying is you might consider an air cooler, because that chip doesn't run hot enough to justify an all-in-one cooler unless you have it in such a case that you're limited with the height of a cooler, in which case then your hands are tied if you don't change the case. Okay, enough on that. Hopefully he'll get it fixed and he'll tell us how he resolved it soon. Knapp says, holy cow, Carey, I'm glad to see you're still making content. I watched many of your PC building guides a decade ago. Your content helped me get into an awesome hobby. Hey, right on, Knapp. I'm not a content creator in that sense. I'm a business owner, and I simply turn the camera on and show you pretty much a business perspective. That's always been my intent. And so as long as I'm still in business, there's no sense not turning the camera on and showing you how the business runs. I don't think there's enough YouTube channels that show real world, real life. But it's really cool that you found me again, and certainly glad that you did. Welcome back. So what I want to do now is I'm going to plug this all back in, and I'm going to show you the drive performance. I'm going to show you how fast this chip heats up when we run Prime 95. Then I'm going to take the heatsink off. I'm going to reapply it again just to make sure these heat issues are not because of me rushing through, because I made a lot of mistakes rushing through, mostly not plugging things all the way in, as I mentioned earlier. And then and I don't expect any of this is going to make any difference, I'll look in the BIOS for that PBO option and turn it off, and likely that's going to solve everything, but at a cost of performance. So let's get started here. And regardless of the outcome, all of this stuff goes back to Patrick anyway. So I'm just kind of curious. We are using the heatsink that the CPU came with, and that should be enough. Unless you're overclocking or you're pushing the CPU to run at higher voltages or frequencies than the engineers designed it, in which case, hey, you got what you deserved. But when we're running a stock CPU at stock speeds with stock parts, it should not be getting to a point of thermal throttling. That's, I mean, not unless you've got it, like if you built the computer and you stuck it in a cabinet and closed the door and it can't breathe, of course it's going to overheat. But here, you know, we've got airflow all around. I just can't find any way to excuse it. I can't find any way to say, well, that's not a big deal. In my mind and in my business, that's a pretty darn big deal to me. But I'm not going to tell you how to feel. I'm just sharing with you how I feel. Not that you asked. Real quickly, let me check the phone. Hey, an Amazon gift card for $25 came in from our friend Mark Gaines in Northern Ireland. Mark says, Carey, I want to thank this wonderful community for all the well wishes and kindness. Right on, Mark. Thank you so much. And thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you. More importantly, thank you for being a part of this amazing community. It's folks like you that make this community so valuable, I think, to all of us. Far more than the content, far more than anything I say, it's the community and the friendship that we have here and the support that we have each other's backs. It's such a rare thing to find on the internet. Alan Lindos sent an Amazon gift card for $7.77. He likes those sevens. He says, this is my today's fee. Well, again, thank you for that. Last night, our friend Brian Lee, who's ordered a couple computers from us out of Nevada, sent an Amazon $50 gift card, just checking in and seeing how things are, and says, thank you for all you do. So that was super cool. Thank you again to our friend Brian Lee for that. Okay. Some folks have sent me some Facebook messages, but I'll deal with that later. I don't think you need to see me doing this. All right, so I've got it all hooked back up. I did, as I mentioned, we got Windows 11 installed during the stream, but there wasn't time to update. So one of the other mistakes I made is I thought, you know, hey, the Super Bowl's going to start soon. I'm sure I'm not the only one that wants to watch it. Let's just try and run Crystal Disk Mark right now. And when I put the flash drive in, the whole system locked up. Well, it turns out there's some necessary drivers for the flash drive to work for the USB interface to work properly, or at least the one I plugged into, Murphy's Law. So I went ahead and I said, okay, we can't test this now. Super Bowl starting, we'll do it later. So while the Super Bowl was on, I went and did all the Windows updates and rebooted it and got the AMD Adrenalin software, rebooted it. Then I put the flash drive in and everything works like it should. So there's nothing wrong with the system other than me trying to push it through fast. I always tell you guys, when you're building systems, take your time and enjoy your build. In retrospect, maybe not putting myself in that 90-minute window to build something I'd never built before was a good idea. On the other hand, I thought it was quite entertaining. Now, if I had built several of these in the past, it probably could have done it in 45 minutes. But nonetheless, I have a slow download speed here. So the Windows updates were still going to take, you know, an hour, plus the AMD Adrenalin software. So there's going to be about an hour or 90 minutes or so of just waiting for updates, regardless of how fast I built it. So let's go over to our HDMI input here. And I will put myself in a corner. And let's take a look at this together. And I'll show you what I have learned or gleaned, discovered since Sunday. All right, here we go. Power's in, power's on. Power switch. Fan is running. I did turn on expo mode to get the overclock speed on the RAM. That seems like it's working fine. I was just curious. And so with all that work being done now, save us some time here that we can get right to the nitty-gritty. So first things first, go full screen on my side here. And I realized just now I have not plugged in a keyboard or mouse. So I'm reaching to move the cursor. And there's no keyboard or mouse here. All right, let me grab that and plug it in. And of course, you can do this while the computer is on if it's USB. Hey, Les Stevenson just renewed his membership. Now a member for 6 months. Hey, thank you, Les. All right, let me get the wireless dongle plugged in over here. Let me make sure I plug it all the way in. That is a very tight USB port. Lessons learned, Patrick would say. And we're going to go over here to, let's see. Let's do Crystal Disk Mark first. Remember, we have a Gen 5 drive that can run at 12,400 megabytes per second in this box right here. 12,400. So when we run this on a new Gen 5 build, we expect to see something close to that. This is not close to that. This is about the maximum speed you can get out of a Gen 4 NVMe drive. That's if you have a high performance NVMe drive. Gen 4 NVMe drive. So the NVMe drives at Gen 4, some of them run at Gen 3 speeds when they're really inexpensive. So just bear that in mind. You want the performance, just like a car, you're going to be charged more. Set your expectations accordingly. So we're doing this live, obviously unscripted. And as you can see, this is Gen 4 all the way down. And we'll let it complete just out of curiosity. And this shows you that you can put a Gen 5 drive in and it will be compatible with Gen 4 and Gen 3. But why would you spend all the extra money just to throttle it? Ah, yes, tomorrow is Valentine's Day. That's right. So apparently you can buy a Pizza Hut pizza as a Valentine's Day breakup. So basically, you could send your partner a Pizza Hut pizza on Valentine's Day, and Pizza Hut will break the news to them that you want to break up. I think just sending you a Pizza Hut pizza on Valentine's Day is a sign you want to break up. But listen, I find that to be really awkward and irresponsible and just almost cruel. If you're with somebody in an emotional relationship, to break up with them via a text message, or sending them a pizza because you don't have the guts, I think you owe it to the other person to sit down and have a heart-to-heart. Running away from it like that is cowardly and disgusting. Curtis Hater in the chat says that would be so cold. Agreed. Mara wants to know who the heck at Pizza Hut thought that would be a good marketing decision. That's a great question, but you can Google that, or better yet, just go to Pizza Hut and order one if you want. I don't think the delivery driver breaks the news. I think it's like in a note or something that comes with the pizza that, hey, this isn't working out. What a terrible thing to do to somebody. Like, even when you want to break up, you don't want to break up on their birthday or Christmas or Valentine's Day, right? That's just like, or somebody's, somebody close to the family passed and you're like, oh, listen, I think, timing is everything. At the very least, you could have a little consideration and stick it out a little bit longer, just have a little humanity, for crying out loud. All right, so you'll see our read and write numbers are really strong. If this was Gen 4, I'd be super happy with that, right? It's not terrible. But the motherboard supports Gen 5, and the drive we paid twice as much money for in order to get twice the speed, or nearly twice the speed at 12,400, and that was a waste of money. If this were an actual build, we would have blown about $200 more than we needed to, with no ability to upgrade it unless we change the CPU. Everything else would accept that Gen 5 and use it, except that CPU. But that CPU has great built-in graphics for gaming. And if that's important to you, then none of this stuff matters to you anyway. For my clients, I don't have a client that cares about that. So, all right, so let's close that out. Now let's take a look at Prime 95. Now, first of all, I'm gonna run hardware info, and these are all free downloadable portable applications that you can run and compare your system if you want to, doing the exact same things I'm doing. There's nothing proprietary here. Nor am I doing anything that requires any amount of, extreme technical knowledge. This is all pretty standard stuff. So let's move this over and get a little smaller. Come on now. Don't make me order a pizza. Here we go. Still sort of overlapping that, aren't I? Let's move this bar that all the way. Let's move this bar. That's a lot of information on the screen. Guess I'm gonna have to turn off camera 1. That's okay, you don't need to look at me. Now, we haven't started Prime 95 yet. I'm just kind of curious where we're at on our temps here. Pretty reasonable, right? This is what I expect. We're in the 40s at idle here. We've got the 6 cores, that's 12 threads. And I'm particularly interested in this series of numbers starting from here down. And when I start Prime 95, let me just get this out of the way for a minute so I can find my desktop. We're going to go to Prime 95, and we're going to start this. And I want you to pay attention to the clock. See how many seconds. Here we go. We've started. The fan's already, whoops. The fan is already cranking up. I get that back. Darn it, where did it go? There it is. Look at how fast that ran. I wish I could have had that up the whole time. But look at up here. Look at this. How many seconds has it been? And in particular, we want to watch these maximum numbers down this column right here. This column of these are going to record any maximum number and hold it there. This column is showing our current temperatures. So the column on the left, current temperatures. Column on the right, maximum temperatures reached. Column in the middle are the minimum temperatures reached. And the column on the far right here is the average. So I'm really interested at this number. Take a look at that number. When you see the number is in red, red is not good. And that's the factory heatsink. So I don't want to run this any longer. It didn't take long. I think you've got the message. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop Prime 95, and then we'll see those temps drop really, really quickly. Let's close that. It's hidden back here. Let me move this all the way over here. And let me see if I can bring up our temperature again. Minimizing to my system tray. All right. Now you'll watch how rapidly these temperatures decline when I hit stop and then hit OK. Now Prime 95 is stopped. And these numbers are going to go back to a regular number. So, I mean, if you never push the computer hard, I guess this is only going to rarely ever overheat. But if you're a regular user and you want to do things like Photoshop or video editing or, I don't know, even playing some games, which is what it's designed to do, some of those games can be pretty resource intensive. And then it's going to throttle, and then your game's going to stutter, and you're not going to be a happy camper. So let me go ahead and close this down. And let me take the heatsink off and reapply it again, just to see if that makes any difference. Now, I don't think it's going to, but again, you cannot assume in this business, or you're gonna not accomplish much as a technician if that's what you do. I can tell you from experience, I've done it enough times and it never works out. Like it's always a bad idea to assume when you don't know what's going on. If you do know what's going on, that's a different story. But when something doesn't make sense, at that point, the fix isn't probably going to make any sense. That's why you can't assume it can't be this or it can't be that. It absolutely can be until you've checked it. All right, so I use this driver to put this on. I might as well use this driver to take it off. Okay, well, the good news is the way AMD applies the thermal compound, they pre-apply it onto the heatsink. The way that it came off, it fully covered the heat spreader perfectly. It is the exact right amount of thermal paste. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. There's no excess, there's no overlap, there's no bald spots. It is exactly, don't tell me I need thermal paste on the back of my head. There, it's completely covered perfectly. All right, and then when you look on the heatsink, it has transferred that thermal compound, except for these little edges where there are the little design, the way the CPU is designed. I don't know how well the camera's picking that up, but it's perfect. All right, so what I want to do is reapply this, and I want to do it the recommended way, as though I was working for a customer. I was going to be held accountable. So we're just going to start any one side and get that screw started, but don't put it down too far. It's good. Go to the opposite corner, just a couple of turns. It'd be a little tricky to see if you're getting it started. Just a couple turns and then see if it pulls up. Then the other two should be much easier. The only reason they're going to be difficult is if you tighten these other ones down too far at first. Should be good. And then finally, this one here closest to me. Okay, so now they're evenly started. What we're trying to avoid is if we start tightening down the screws, especially in the beginning, then the CPU heatsink starts to lift up on an angle and you have to push down on it and push hard on the screwdriver to get the screw started. And then what you're doing is you're trying to counterbalance what it's doing, and then it may not sit flush across the top of the heatsink, and you can't see that because it's covering it. It may be sitting this way, or it may be there's some more pressure on one side than the other, and so the coverage then is no longer equally spread out. And so you'll end up with half of the CPU running hot and the other half running fine. That's not going to cut it, especially when you're running a CPU that gets as hot as this. So just like putting a tire onto a car, you want to tighten the bolts down in a star pattern. You want to do opposite corners and not tighten them all the way down one at a time, but to just gradually 2, 3, and then come over here, 1, 2, 3. And then back around again. And we try to evenly distribute the pressure by doing it this way. This should be about the last round, I think. Yep. So now we'll take them to a dead stop. Perfect. Perfect. Screws are at a dead stop. One more check to make sure they don't move anymore. Yeah, that one's not budging. That one's not budging. Not budging. And not budging. Perfect. Let's run the test again. You never know. Could be that easy. Power supply's on. Fire that bad boy up. Put myself in the corner again. And David Graham says you should use the bigger fan. Well, the bigger heatsink, it's the same size fan. I know what you meant. That fan comes with the more powerful CPU. I want to use, look, if you were to order this CPU, David, this is the fan and heatsink you're going to get. You don't get that one unless you order the 8700. There's a reason why. So one of the things I find disappointing about both of them is they're purely aluminum. There's no copper core on these. And you'd think if that CPU ran that hot, that would at least be a copper middle on those heat sinks. They are very, very cheap heat sinks. Now, if that's all that's needed, that's fine. But so far, that doesn't seem to be the case. But maybe I applied the heatsink incorrectly. Well, there's no maybe. I certainly didn't follow the normal procedure that I recommend to use in the real world. I would not have done that for a customer. All right, just to be clear, I was in a hurry and I didn't think that was going to be an issue. Like I didn't think it would be that sensitive. I was wrong. All right, let me go back full screen over here. Let's start the HW, the hardware info program here. Okay. Once again, we want to look down this aisle right here. We seem to be pretty much in the same general vicinity, so I don't think this is going to make any difference. And then let me bring up Prime 95. So I'll minimize this again. Prime 95. Started. Close this window. Bring up the hardware monitor this time. Let me turn off camera 1 so you guys can see everything. Okay, so again, pay attention to how many seconds are going to go by before you start seeing red. Here we go. Start. Look how quick this heats up. Boom, we're already in the red that quickly. So there's something called this precision boost overdrive, and Intel has their version of it too, where it is essentially overclocking the CPU for us. That's why overclocking is kind of a dead hobbyist thing. Like some people still do it, but for the most part, you're already, the CPU and the motherboard, well, it's the motherboard, is already overclocking it for you. Now, if AMD is telling us this is a normal operation and nothing to be concerned about, I would say your heatsink is inadequate. Steve Mercure says it was 10 seconds by his count that re-hit temperatures in the red. All right, so here's what I want to do. I want to find PBO in the BIOS and turn it off. See if that makes any difference. So we'll stop this. Oh, did I stop it? Yes, I did. Temperatures are dropping. All right, we'll close it out. Shut it down. And this time when I reboot, I'm going to go into the BIOS. Now, it's not crashing, but I'm also nervous about letting it continue to run at those temps. And of course, the fan is ramping up. So now that we're here in the BIOS, somewhere in here, there's our throttling limit, performance preset, PBO enabled. PBO, oh, this is interesting. We can tell PBO to limit it to 85 with a negative 20 millivolts. Well, that's pretty darn cool. But you see how this is set to auto? I don't know how it's determining that 95 is okay. I don't get that. So let's set it to the minimal, which is, if we reduce it, well, I want to have the least impact on performance. So that's going to be right there with PBO and TJ Max at 85C. that would be what I consider probably negligible with regards to noticing any performance difference in theory. Now, the minute we start subtracting some voltage, even if it's millivolts, it's likely going to have an impact on performance. And the further down we go down this list, the more of a performance hit we're going to take. So I want to go just to the first option for the lowest hit performance, the lowest hit on performance. So we're going to select that. You can see I'm running at DDR5 6400, which is what this RAM is rated at, and that's working perfectly. And we're going to save and exit, and we're going to repeat these changes, okay? Or we're going to repeat our tests now that we've done these changes. Words are coming out of my mouth too quickly. Now, wouldn't you think that would be the auto setting from the factory? But no, the factory wants the reviewers to get outstanding numbers when they test. So this is done with intention so that the reviewers go, wow, look at how crazy these numbers are. It's not practical, and it's silly to me to skew the results of the tests so that people are left with the impression that this is super high performing and there's no consequence to that. So we're going to go back over to hardware info, and we're going to start that up one more time. And yes, now remember, this is just the 8600G. You can imagine how much hotter the 8700G gets, because it has a much bigger heatsink and fan. Okay, so we'll scroll down. Again, we're kind of sitting in that same ballpark for idle temps. It really hasn't made any difference there. However, PBO hasn't kicked in yet. So we'll go over to Prime 95. So once more, I have to minimize, go to my Prime 95, launch the application, and then close the folder here. And we're going to bring back hardware info so we can see it when we start our test here. And start. Now, let's see what difference, if any, that this change has made. So at 83, we're okay. There's 85. It should stay at 85 and should not exceed 85 in theory. So as long as we don't see 86, so 85 point something is okay, according to what I'm interpreting from the BIOS. Now, I'm the kind of guy that when I build systems, I don't want to have to manually make changes in the BIOS that I end up selling to a customer and have the customer reset something, or I have to reset something. And I didn't remember that I had to do that for that one system, for that one customer. It's out of the norm. So let's say the customer gets a BIOS update on their own, or for whatever reason, they've made some changes and the BIOS gets reset. Maybe the CMOS battery dies in time. It happens. Okay. Customer calls me, I go out there, I fix the CMOS battery, or I get a call that the system's starting to overheat now after a BIOS update. And I have to figure out, is something wrong with the heat sink? Is something wrong with the thermal compound? And you know what I'm not thinking of? That there's a setting in the BIOS by default that's getting it too hot. So then I would have to have a system in place where I leave special notes, or I leave notes specific to a customer, which is, I don't do that. All the customers are treated the same. All the hardware is done the same. It's much less confusing, and it's much easier to support customers. So when a customer has something different from everybody else, then I have to know that. I have to remember it. I have to have a way to pull that information back, because I will have long forgotten about this as I've moved on helping other clients. And it'll be like, oh, you've got to change the PBO setting in the BIOS from the default. You've got to be kidding me. And that's not an easy thing to walk a customer through over the phone. They don't know what a BIOS is. They never hit the key at the right time, and I can't see it remotely. So, how does that tell you how I feel? Maybe a different motherboard using the same chip wouldn't run it that hot. But I'd like to see that at least the BIOS is doing what it said it would do. The fan is also quieter. And that resolves my concern regarding the throttle. or the heat. It didn't throttle. It just got really hot, and I was uncomfortable with that heat. AMD says you don't need to worry, 95 is fine. And based on the BIOS information, it won't let it get hotter than 95. We could have left it. Now that I have seen the BIOS, we could have left that alone. And the BIOS was saying, okay, I'm going to let it get to 95, and that's perfectly acceptable. Isn't that interesting? So what that's telling you is, when you're seeing that temperature climb and you're like, oh no, I'm at 95, there's only 5 degrees left before it thermal throttles. That's getting awful close to the ceiling. That's a little too close for comfort. I better shut it down before that happens. Well, it turns out with this motherboard, it won't let that happen. It's going to keep it at 95. Just like it's keeping it at 85, it will have kept it at 95 the whole time. So we could put that back to auto, but we will also hear a louder fan. And for those of us not used to temps that high, that might just make you uncomfortable and have some anxiety. If you're new to computers and you don't know the difference, ignorance is bliss, and it'll likely be okay. So AMD is saying 95 is perfectly fine and nothing to fix. I am gobsmacked. Will running it at 95, sorry, I was getting another Gatorade. Will running this at 95 over time reduce the life of that chip? I'm going to guess it will. But I'm also going to guess AMD doesn't expect you to have this chip more than 5 or 6 years, tops. And they want to sell you another chip. Why do you think they keep coming out with new chips? That in 5 or 6 years, you're going to look at this chip and go, ugh, why do I still have this old chip? You know, compared to what's out today, this thing's a dog. And as long as the motherboard, you know, AMD's been really good about honoring socket compatibility. So there's a chance, maybe not in 5 or 6 years, but maybe in 3 or 4 years, a brand new AMD chip comes out that you can slot right in there and get a whole new level of performance. And ideally, Gen 5 will be enabled without having to change anything else. I mean, in theory, you could just get a different AMD chip, not an 8000 series, and have Gen 5 enabled today. Matt wants to know, what about it burning up the motherboard? No, the motherboard, so the motherboard manufacturers and AMD work together. So the motherboard BIOS isn't going to offer you this ability to lock it in at 95 degrees Celsius unless they've got the heat sinks over the VRMs, the voltage regulator modules. These are pretty beefy on this motherboard. I don't normally pay attention to that because I'm not an overclocker, but think of PBO as overclocking for you. And the motherboard is monitoring everything, not just the CPU. It's monitoring its VRMs as well. And the engineers have designed the VRMs so that there won't be any issue. Now, if you went back to an older motherboard and you slotted one of these AMD 5 CPUs in theory, with a BIOS update that may be required, that motherboard may not allow that chip to get to 95. If the engineers who designed that board, say 2 years ago, or however old the AM5 socket is at this point, never designed it for those kind of temperatures, they'll lock that into the BIOS. So in either case, you won't have an issue of the motherboard burning up per se, but you may have lower performance on an older board specifically for that reason. That's a good question. Appreciate you asking. David Graham contributes $5. He goes, in 5 years, it's all going to be AI chips. In fact, Windows is counting on it. Yes, and in fact, this chip has some AI stuff. I don't quite, I haven't studied it much because I'm not interested in it yet. But there's supposed to be like an NPU in here, as I recall. And that has something to do with API. API. It has something to do with AI. Remember I said there's all these different terminologies. And I don't think it matters much to have that information right now. but it's happening quickly. So it likely won't be long before we're going to start paying attention to that. I will. Right now, I don't care. It doesn't make a difference because I don't use anything AI yet. So it's hard to know what I'm looking for or what I need if it's something I'm not using yet. So I tend to focus on what my needs are or what my customers' needs are when I'm looking at specifications and performance. You know, if this thing performs well doing something nobody I know uses, it doesn't. Like the integrated graphics, I don't have any clients that are going to benefit from the higher end integrated graphics on this. But several gamers online specifically that are enthusiasts, I'm sure will appreciate the console-like performance where the I/O is sacrificed. That's a typical console-style chip. And some people may really cherish that. They may really like it. But if you don't know what you're buying, like if you're just making the assumption that I did, that each generation of chip is going to be better, or at least similar to the previous, that doesn't apply in AMD's world because the X3D chips play under completely different rules. And you may hate that. It may actually be a dog for the games you play, or it might be a great boost to the games you play, depending on the games you play. Mara says an NPU is an A-neural processing unit. A-neural or neural? I don't know. Doesn't mean anything to me. Douglas says, do you refill your old Gatorade with half drink it? No, I don't. All the bottles, I don't want to mix warm and cold. Yeah. Christian in the chat says we already got iGPU results for the APU, the integrated graphics on this, with overclock up to 3100 megahertz and a power consumption of up to 150 watts. Yeah. Well, again, anytime you're going to expect more power, more performance, it's going to take more power to get more power. That's pretty well universal. And when you take more power, you generate more heat. And when you generate more heat, you have to have more aggressive cooling, and that may be a louder system or a complex custom liquid cooler. It really varies depending on what your expectations, what your budget is, and what you're willing to tolerate, and how important it is to you. So this is all going to vary depending on each individual. But again, if you go into this not knowing that, you might have buyer's regret. So there you go. It's locked in at 85. It will not exceed that. And likewise, when it was set to auto, it's going to lock in at 95, and it's going to leave it there. And it says, don't worry about it. And at 95, we're going to get a little more performance out of this. The fan's also going to get a little louder. And the lifespan of the CPU is likely not going to be affected by warranty. So as long as the CPU outlives the warranty, who cares? So if the warranty on the CPU is 2 or 3 years, running it at 95 consistently for that warranty period, it's going to run just fine. And after that, hey, if it burns up, if it wears out, it's time to buy a new one. That's the way the manufacturers typically, I'm not going to say that's what this manufacturer is thinking, but that's likely something similar to what they're thinking. They don't want to just sell you one CPU. They want you to come back and buy another one. And they're going to give you reasons. Hey, this one can do more. This one can have features and do things that the other one can't. Oh, and if your CPU should happen to fail because you've been running it hot for the last 5 years, well, you won't feel too bad about it. It's a good excuse to make your system better than it ever was before, right? Every way you look at it, it's positive when you're the manufacturer. David Graham says, who needs Gen 5 PCIe? Well, when you want to be inconsiderate and not think of anybody but yourself, then the answer is nobody in your world living in your shoes. But if you want to open your mind a little bit and imagine how other people use their computers, Gen 5 NVMe can make a world of difference in productivity. And the better productivity, the more money you can make, depending on what it is you do with the computer. So when you're a home user and you're just a hobbyist, it's going to be very hard to justify that. But if you're a video production person, or you run some video, some high intensity IO processing tasks, and you're able to accomplish more in that 8-hour workday, that means you're getting more work done. That means you're able to help more customers. That means you're able to make more money. So it's sort of like asking, in some ways, it's like saying Dodge sells the Hellcat. Who needs 800 horsepower? I would have a hard time trying to find an excuse for somebody who needs 800 horsepower on a street legal car. That's strictly a want, right? But in the case of computers, there are actual business use cases that absolutely demand whatever the best is. If you're on an oil rig out in the ocean and you're scanning the ocean floor looking for places to drill for oil, that's easily a $12,000 graphics card that's processing the topology of the ocean floor. And it's entirely IO intense as it's recording the topology as it's scanning it. And you want to be able to move at a certain speed to keep up with how the rig is moving. Now that's a very specific use case scenario. But in many of the things that you enjoy in your life, from the power that's being delivered to your house to the water, you have no concept of the technology they're using to measure it, to bill you, you know, to maintain it, to make sure the quality of it is there, to prevent problems that are starting that you as a customer never even knew were issues. And all of that's done with some pretty high-end technology that, as a home user, doesn't matter to you. It has no benefit to you. But at the same time, services that you utilize from other companies might be using that, and you're just blissfully unaware and think, well, that has no use to anybody. But that's an awfully narrow tunnel vision view of the world. There is a world around you, and different people doing different things with different needs, whether it's businesses or just different hobbyists. So, you know, I would say that if you're considerate and thoughtful, it will occur to you that just because something doesn't apply to you doesn't mean it has no justification to exist. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here. That cracked me up. How long have you been running on this now? I think I've made a point though, right? We know that's not going to go. Are you convinced that's not going to go any higher than 85? We're at 16 minutes. I usually let the test run 20, 25 minutes. I promise you that will not go to 86. That motherboard BIOS is going to prevent that. And if we left it alone, it would not have gone any higher than 95. And if we wanted to drop it to 75, it wouldn't go any higher than 75. And every time we drop it down, we lose performance. So Intel has something similar. I was going to say the Intel platform doesn't work this way, but it's certainly not. It does work very similarly, but not at those temps. Intel cuts it off way earlier than that, with the exception that some motherboard manufacturers have been known to go outside of the engineering recommendations because the motherboard manufacturer says it's fine. You don't mind a louder fan or more aggressive cooling, I guess that might be fine with you too. But if you have no idea this is going on behind the scenes, you might be scratching your head and wasting a lot of time buying a more expensive cooler, buying more expensive thermal paste, and you're pulling your hair out going, I can't get these temps down. How mad are you going to be after all that time and money invested to get zero results, or effectively this thing's going to climb right back up to 85 again? Because it can. So the more we cool it, the more power it's going to throw at it until it hits 85 potentially. So in theory, even with the biggest cooler on this will still likely climb to 85 as we've got it set and stop there. I mean, I'd have to test it to prove that theory, but that's certainly what it appears, because it's holding back at 85. And when it hits 95, it's holding back at 95. You understand that, right? It's holding itself back. So even with the best cooler we can put on this, it looks like it could climb even higher in performance and voltage that it's throwing at it to hit these temperatures. because there's more there to be had, and it's reserving itself. It's holding itself back. Think about that. Matt says the new Adobe Photoshop needs the new processor or it doesn't work. Perfect example. Anybody here in the chat room use the newest version of Adobe Photoshop or Photoshop at all? All right. I just want to see if I missed any other questions. David Graham contributes $5. He goes, in 5 years, all the chips will have to be AI, and Windows is counting on it. Did I read that one? Yeah, for sure. They've already introduced the Copilot thing in Windows 11 that came in on one of the updates. And if you Google for the new Windows 11 Big Moment 5, I think it's called, that's going to introduce a bunch of new stuff. Some people are pretty excited about it. I don't know. It kind of feels like more of the same to me. And all of my clients are on Windows 10 regardless. So in the summer of 2025, a little over a year from now, year and 4 months, almost a year and a half, will I start to upgrade away from Windows 10 for my clients. Unless something happens between now and then, that's the plan. And if there is a Windows 12 that comes out this year, which is a rumor, if that turns out to be true, we'll likely skip right over Windows 11 and go straight to Windows 12. Douglas Burchell seems fascinated with my Gatorade bottles. This is the strangest question. So we're a tech channel here, Douglas. We're here to talk tech. I'm not here to talk about Gatorade. One of the things that's frustrating is trying to keep this channel on point, trying to not allow myself to be distracted with, hey, who makes the clock on the wall? Or, you know, they're paying attention to stuff in the background and telling me my clock is off on the wall by 2 minutes. And I'm trying to convey technical information in a classroom style, and I got people not listening, and they're looking at my Gatorade bottle. Or, you understand? It's very frustrating for me to go off topic, unless we're doing like a members only private video, or it's an Ask Me Anything scenario. But when we do these topics, I pretty much appreciate that we stay on topic or anything related to this topic. Okay, guys, I think that's going to wrap it up for today, because essentially we've learned here how AMD is addressing this issue and how they don't consider it an issue. And that in fact, the smaller heatsink is just fine. That motherboard it's really relying on the motherboard manufacturers to apply these rules properly. That's just different from the world I'm used to with Intel. I'm not going to say it's better or it's worse. It's really up to you to make that determination. But what I'm trying to achieve here is to make you aware of it. Because prior to this video, probably like me, you had no idea that this chip wouldn't be Gen 5, that running it at 95 is normal, and that it's not going to go any hotter than that. And that if you're uncomfortable with it, you can choose to sacrifice some performance and change it in the BIOS, and it won't go any higher than what you adjusted in the BIOS, as you've witnessed here. That thing has never hit 86. So it's allowed to hit 85.9. It just cannot hit 86 according to the BIOS rules that we applied here. I think that's pretty interesting. And it's certainly nothing that I have demonstrated with Intel before, because I've never needed to. So if something similar to this, so Intel has their own version of PBO, forget what it's called, but I've never had it cause a heat issue like this before. And AMD is saying that's not a heat issue. That's standard operating procedure, SOP. That is exactly what it's intended to do. Leave it alone. If you want the best performance and the best reliability, leave it alone. Now, it also looks like this computer must have got an update in the background. See that? It wants to restart. So not only were we running Prime 95, it was doing some update in the background from Windows Update. Isn't that interesting? And I think we're pretty well, we're at 22 minutes on this test. And I think that, you know, it's pretty clear that nothing's going to change here. That temp's going to stay locked in. So what I'm going to do, at least until I stop Prime 95, I'm going to say not now, this, and we'll stop the test. Of course, these temps are going to drop real rapidly now. Stop the test. Go ahead and close this and close this. And now we can restart and let those updates apply, whatever they are. And now we'll go back to full screen on camera 1, and we'll wrap things up for today. Let me check the phone one more time, see if I've missed anything else there. And then if you have any final related questions that I can answer for you, I'll do my best, or concerns. Speak now. Yeah. Let's see. Emails. $25 from Luke Greenia. He says, because every little bit counts. Luke joins us from Vermont and is a frequent contributor here. Thank you so much, Luke. And as mentioned earlier, Mark Gaines, Alan Lindos, and Brian Lee sent Amazon gift cards. And thank you guys again for supporting the channel. Thank you also for the your membership and your kindness. Your friendship is very much appreciated. Matt says, what are those programs to check the heat? I only use hardware info for monitoring the temps. And then I use Prime 95, specifically version 26.6, and I leave everything at defaults. That's it. It's very simple. And a quick Google search will reveal those for you. You can also look to other websites that do testing and see what they're using and what software some people use. Well, I don't know anybody that's using Prime 95 these days. They're all using Cinebench and other things. So they're all free. And I always download the portable versions. I don't install the software because when I build systems, they're going to customers, and I don't want any residual stuff in the registry or in the Windows subdirectory. So I always run portable CPU-Z or hardware info, Crystal Disk Info, Crystal Disk Mark. There's installers, and then there's portables. I always use the portables, so nothing's left behind on the customer system. Okay. Carlos Hernandez says Microsoft's newest commercial said Windows 12 is the newest Windows 11 upgrade. If you have a link to that from Microsoft, I'd like to see it. Remember, Microsoft is going to play their hands close, their cards close to their chest. They don't want the competition to know what's coming and have it potentially interfere with sales. So even if that is the official word from Microsoft, that may not be entirely true. Or then again, it might. On the other hand, it may not have actually come from Microsoft. You might be watching something fake. So that's why I ask if you have any news-related item, don't tell me because I don't believe you. You need to provide me a link to a reputable website. And in this case, I'd like to see a link from Microsoft so that I can see what you're referring to. There's too much bogus information and people messing around online to just take anybody's word for anything in today's day and age. Slappy says, great stream again, Carey. Good night, everyone. Thank you, Slappy. And he wants to know if that setting's on all motherboards in the BIOS. Well, when it comes to modern AMD processors that support PBO, yes. But if you have an older motherboard and an older processor before PBO was invented, no. But any modern day AMD CPU, as far as I know, they all support PBO. and therefore the motherboard would need to support PBO to use it. If you put an AMD CPU that supports PBO on a motherboard that doesn't, then that CPU will not run at its full potential. All right, any other final questions? Thomas Backenstow says, great show, Carey and Marlena. Thank you, Thomas. Luke Greenia says, check your phone. Oh, I just saw that. Guess we're ahead of there. David Graham says, well, it turned out to be okay after all. Well, is it? Is it? I think whether or not that's okay isn't necessarily fact. I think that it's an opinion. If you think it's okay, once again, David, it seems like there's this one-sided, tunnel vision. And what I'm trying to emphasize here on the channel is there's often not a one-size-fits-all answer. For people that have different needs, different expectations, different budgets, and different tolerances, a fan getting that loud because the temperatures are running that loud may drive somebody mad. And for them, it's not okay. From the manufacturer's perspective, it is okay. But the manufacturer might also say that for everything they do, just as a boilerplate response to prevent getting sued and admitting any wrongdoing. In this case, that's not the situation, but in this case, it feels a little desperate. What they're basically saying, here's what I'm hearing as a tech. I'm hearing the company say, we can't compete with Intel unless we push our processors to the edge, generating far more heat than what would be considered normal in the industry. That's what I see. And if you ask me, is that okay? I'm going to say that's desperate. Is desperation okay at these prices when you've got something else for a similar price that doesn't have this issue? I don't think it's okay. No. But is it going to cause a fire? Is it detrimental to the system? Time will tell. But at this point right now, it's too early to know the answer to that. So is it a problem to be fixed? Well, not by you or me. As I mentioned, if you're spending a lot of money trying to cool this chip and you're getting nowhere, wondering what you're doing wrong or what's wrong with your equipment, it's nothing, potentially, it's nothing you can fix at any price other than don't use this hardware. If you're of that personality type that's going to bother you, stay away from this platform. If you're of the personality type that you don't care as long as you get that added performance, then do buy this platform. See, it's like, again, it's that Cheesecake Factory menu. Don't tell somebody don't order that, it's not good. That's your opinion. Allow people to have their own experiences and to come up with their own opinions without designating a black and white, it's this or it's that. In this world of technology, and in computers in particular, there's so much individuality and there's so many different preferences. It's wrong, in my opinion, to say, unless it is a factually wrong thing, something dangerous or potentially dangerous that we factually know, we can't say for certain whether this is okay or not for longevity. I don't know. So at the end of the day, it matters what the individual feels, their conclusion. And their conclusion doesn't matter to anybody else, nor does it impact anybody else. It's like who you want to vote for. Like, who cares? Vote for whoever. Don't let somebody else tell you who to vote for. Don't say that that person running is the best person, period, end of story. Because somebody else will say that's the worst person, and you're both right and you're both wrong. And I want to encourage people to think for themselves and not to just be told what to think or to be given an absolute. The world today, I see too many people looking for absolutes. There's very few absolutes in the world today, right? And if you're putting on an anti-theft device like one of those steering wheel locks on your car to prevent it from stolen, your car can still be stolen. If you've got an alarm and locks on your door to your house, you can still be broken into. There are no absolutes in this world other than taxes and death, I suppose. The thing is it's for each person to decide in these categories where they feel secure, what's good enough, what's too much, or what costs too much. Maybe an alarm system costs too much, or monthly maintenance, or it's all these different individual solutions to allow people to decide for themselves. And I want to encourage all of you to decide for yourself. But if you didn't have this information, how would you know any better? And that's it. That's the point of the show. Thank you for watching. That's going to wrap it up for me for today. Steve Multiversos with a €1 contribution here. Thank you so much, Steve. There's Bull142 in there, and Paul Kitching, Jason Willis, who says 0 sugar cheesecake is never good. I don't know. Mara might disagree. And yeah, we're good. That's going to wrap it up for me for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for your support and your kindness. And thank you to Patrick over at Serve the Home for loaning us the equipment. That's going to wrap it up. I will see you all tomorrow, Valentine's Day. I've got a very cool little mini PC that looks very similar, eerily similar to one I reviewed. Hope you'll join me for that. Until next time, bye for now.